Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Asia Gilbert, and I am your mistress of ceremony today. I volunteer with 9 Forward by serving as co-chair, along with Stephen Stern for the research committee. Thank you for joining us today virtually. For today's soil collection ceremony, to memorialize a Black man whose name is unknown. Before we get started, let's review a few key things about how we will interact together on this Zoom webinar. This program is being recorded, and we encourage you to share it with your friends and family on social media. Feel free to share the Zoom link, which was just sent in the chat, on all your social media platforms, as this ceremony is open to all. Additionally, the Jacksonville Community Remembrance Project Steering Committee would like this to be a very interactive session. So throughout the program, share your thoughts with the speakers and members of the audience by using the chat section. Simply click on the chat icon at the bottom of your screen to send messages to the host and/or members of the audience. I would like to acknowledge the 904 Forward Board of Directors led by our board chair, Tracy Towsey. I would also like to thank the amazing co-chairs of the JCRP committee and 904 board members, Lynn Sherman and Melanie Patz, along with the assistance of Hope McMath and Laureen Husband, in addition to the JCRP Steering Committee, research team, and Caring Circle facilitators, whom you'll meet after today's program. The Jacksonville Community Remembrance Project is an initiative of 9 Forward. Our vision at 9 Forward is to see an end to racism so that all people thrive. We go after this vision by creating safe, brave spaces for deep conversations, building trusting relationships, and moving together towards collective action. Our desire is to positively impact Jacksonville by having our community to embrace an unvarnished understanding of our racial history that exists here, even when the painful truth of our past is in direct conflict with the future for which we are aiming. Today is a small commemoration and acknowledgement for all the pain and suffering African Americans have endured in the United States. Almost 100 years ago, in this Jacksonville community, Black residents experienced a time of hysteria and racial tension. Mobs of angry mass vigilantes haunted them throughout their daily lives. Today, we not only remember the life lost during this era, but we also remember the tribulations and lasting effects this had on an entire community. The volunteer-driven Jacksonville Community Remembrance Project works to increase awareness of racism, its history, its trauma, and its impact today. JCRP aims to promote truth, understanding, and reconciliation for our community, and activate collective ownership toward racial equity in Jacksonville, Florida. This project is part of a national movement to create public memorials on lynching spearheaded by the Equal Justice Initiative to acknowledge and remember the legacy of racial terror lynchings. Together with the Equal Justice Initiative, the Jacksonville Community Remembrance Project is working to research, commemorate, and recognize the traumatic era of lynching by collecting soil from lynching sites across the area and erecting historical markers in these spaces. When the effort is complete, it will result in published research with about the documented cases, the establishment and unveiling of historical markers, and the dedication of a monument for Duval County, created in partnership with the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, community-wide and youth education programming, and a scholarship essay contest for youth. This is a sixth event in a series of 8 that the Jacksonville Community Remembrance Project hopes to complete by the end of 2022. We invite each of you to join us immediately following the program for the virtual caring circles. You'll receive a separate link to join the discussion at the end of the event. During the caring circles, you will have the opportunity to participate in an open discussion with other audience members about today's experience. I would now like to introduce our soloist, Renee Richardson, as she sings Lift Every Voice and Sing, also known as the Negro National Anthem, written by James Weldon Johnson. She will be followed by Pastor Reginald Gundy, the pastor for Mount Sinai Missionary Baptist Church, who will offer a few remarks and an opening prayer.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicings rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling seas. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place of which our Father sighed. We have come over a way where with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light. Keep us forever in the path, we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our heart, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
Thank you so much for that. You may be seated. Thank you so much for that song of God of the National Negro Anthem. My name is Pastor Oral Gundy, and I am here to share a few words. It's fitting that we are here, and what I would say one of the center of one of the most racist places you could be in this Jacksonville, here in this what is now Springfield Park, used to be known as Confederate Park, and behind the backdrop here, we're trying to get them to take this statue down. But I say that to say this: I am still concerned about a lot of things, but One of the things I'm really concerned is the fact that our ancestors who came across that water, who have stood the test of time, and we have made it this far, we still have a long way to go. And as I open up with this prayer, I pray that everybody would realize that what happened to this gentleman, this person, should have never happened, and it would have not happened if the white evangelical Christian races had not allowed these things to happen in the past, but they supported it, and they still support it today. But these are the things that we are contending with. But we come to remember the tragedy of hanging someone, and they're still hanging people. They're hanging us here in Jacksonville. With at one time it was 45% of the population in Jacksonville were enslaved, and then they hung us again with the consolidated government, and they're hanging us with the legislation in the city and the state and around this country. But we have come this far by faith. So let us pray. God of our weary years and God of our silent tears, thou who have brought us thus far along the way. And in that, God, we realize that you did not bring us this far to leave us, because you promised us that you will never forsake us. And so we come now and we lift the family up of this person who is known but yet known. We lift this family up, and wherever they are, but they don't realize what had happened to their loved ones. We don't really know who this person is, but God, you do. And I know through your grace, your mercy, there's no way that when they left this side, they're not with you, so they're still safe in your arms. We thank everyone who's a part of trying to do this, that we can bring these memorials back to our city. We pray wherever you are and whoever you are and you hear this, help us to do those things that require us to come and recognize people who have been lynched around this country. Bless us now, God, in this moment in time together as we memorialize this place, as we collect this soil on this place that is one of the most racist places that existed in this city. So it's fitting that we would collect it from this spot. And God, we pray that as the various people come behind me, that they would be able to speak and say those things that would touch somebody's heart, move somebody's soul. But like I said this morning, God, the only hands that God have are our hands. The only feet that God have is our feet and our mind. We have to make the difference. We have to fight the good fight to change the discrimination and racism that exists in this world. So bless us individually, bless us collectively, and bless this moment in time together. In Christ's name I pray, amen.
Thank you, Renee and Pastor Gundy. We will now learn more about our purpose from the Jacksonville Community Remembrance Project co-chairs, Melanie Patz and Lynn Sherman.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon to just share a little bit about what we know to be true about what happened to this unknown man. I want to give you a little bit of a background in terms of how we approach the purpose of this event this morning. And then my co-chair, Melanie Patz, will come and give you a little bit more of what's happening and how it's felt around our community today. So in February 1925, the exact date unknown, an unidentified Black man was murdered by a white lynch mob in Jacksonville, Florida. A little more than a week after another Black man, Willie Washington, was lynched. According to reports, on February 8th, a white man alleged that a big burly Negro assaulted a young white woman near Panama City in Jacksonville. When news spread of the alleged assault, a white mob of several hundred men, including law enforcement, terrorized the African-American community by beating, intimidating, and indiscriminately shooting into Black-owned homes, killing an unidentified Black man. Most details about the life and death of this man simply remains unknown. In the weeks following the death of this unidentified Black man in the field, Secretary the National Urban League uncovered that the assault was orchestrated by a white man who tried to conceal his identity. The white man reportedly hired another white man who dressed in blackface to assault the woman in the park. After being questioned by the police, the attacker confessed. Despite crimes and the confession, there is no evidence that either white man was held accountable or that anyone for the subsequent mob that terrorized in the African American community was prosecuted. During this era of racial terror lynching, white people's allegations against Black people were rarely subject to serious scrutiny and often sparked violent reprisal. In a strictly maintained racial caste system, white people's fear of interracial sex extended to any action that could be interpreted as a Black man seeking contact with a white woman. Accusations of assault regularly sparked the pervasive stereotype that Black men were dangerous and was a threat to white womanhood. According to the newspaper reports, in the winter of 1925, several white women alleged that they were attacked by Black men. These reports created heightened tension in the Jacksonville community. On February the 8th, the tension escalated after local newspapers reportedly broadcast stories with the headline, "Another Negro Assaults a White Woman." Following this announcement, mobs of armed white people drove through the African American community and shot at random into homes of Black people, killing this unidentified Black man. Police officers reportedly fueled the community-wide terror as arresting, beating, and intimidating Black people they encountered on the street. The deep racial hostility that permeated Southern society burdened Black people with a presumption of guilt and often served to focus suspicion on Black communities after a crime was discovered, whether evidence supported that suspicion or not. Like this unidentified man, many lynching victims never had a chance to stand trial for their alleged crimes, and many became victims of arbitrary violence against their entire Black community after mere allegations of Black on white violence. This unidentified Black man was one of at least 8 African American victims of racial terror lynchings in Duval County between 1877 and 1950. Bob Morris, a member of our Jacksonville Community Remembrance Project Steering Committee, put it so well when he said, "This man's name was not recorded, but he was someone's son, probably someone's brother, maybe someone's husband and or father, and most especially, he was known and loved by the one who created us and all that is. He was a human, just like you and me. Though we know not his name, we do know a lot about him because we share the human experience with him. We're made of the same stuff." Thank you.
Years ago, Lynn and I met with a group of African American ministers about the Jacksonville Community Remembrance Project. They expressed concern that there were many more people lynched than had been uncovered at the time, and many whose names and murders were not recorded in newspapers or other historical artifacts. They were correct. The man we memorialize today is one such incident uncovered through additional research. Those ministers were speaking from their present day experiences when incidents of racial injustice and terror are not recorded or are covered up. We stand here today to acknowledge the many incidents of racial terror, past and present, for which there is no documentation. While they are unknown to us, they are not unknown. We bear witness to pain and loss and encourage us to rise up to love, justice, and mercy as the more excellent way for all, white and Black.
Thank you, Melanie and Lynn. As mentioned earlier, the work of the Jacksonville Community Remembrance Project is guided by the principles of the Equal Justice Initiative. The Equal Justice Initiative is committed to ending mass incarceration and excessive punishment in the United States, to challenging racial and economic injustice, and to protecting basic human rights for the most vulnerable people in American society. EJI's Community Remembrance Project is one tool used to support communities looking to engage in this work and is part of a larger movement to create an era of restorative truth-telling and justice that changes the consciousness of our nation. Check out this video to learn more about EJI and the legacy of racial injustice.
Black people came to this country after being abducted, kidnapped, and trafficked across the Atlantic Ocean in horrific conditions of confinement. The arrival of chained Africans in 1619 was followed by 2.5 centuries of bondage, violence, degradation, and abusive enslavement. White enslavers created false myths about Black people to justify slavery. Black people were defined as less human, less evolved, less capable, and less worthy of respect. Despite these false ideas of racial difference, enslaved Black people cultivated strategies for survival, fought for freedom, and held on to their dignity and humanity despite the hardships and suffering. When emancipation finally came in 1865, formerly enslaved Black Americans could have sought revenge and retribution against those who had abused them. Instead, most committed themselves to peace, to community, to citizenship, and to a new America. Many Black survivors of slavery were so committed to family that they spent their last resources to find their children, siblings, spouses, and loved ones who had been sold away. By 1867, 80% of Black men had registered to vote. Many ran for office and accepted leadership positions in their community. Education became a priority in the Black community, and Black schools created a generation of skilled citizens who could help the nation grow. But many white leaders were violently resistant to these aspirations for racial equality and citizenship. White mobs attacked Black people and used lynching, violence, and racial terror to prevent Black progress. Congress abandoned Reconstruction in 1877, and the United States Supreme Court sided with former Confederates and white Southerners who declared states' rights to disenfranchise Black people, restore racial hierarchy, and subordinate Black communities. As former New York Governor Horatio Seymour announced, "This is a white man's country, let white men rule." For a century, racial terror lynchings, racist laws, and Jim Crow practices oppressed Black people. When millions fled violence and abuse in the South and moved to the North and West, they faced less risk of mob violence, but continued to see discrimination and bigotry. A heroic civil rights movement emerged in the 1950s and 1960s, led by courageous Black people committed to community and nonviolence. These extraordinary people were beaten and battered. Some were killed, but they dismantled legal apartheid, racial segregation, and legally sanctioned racial hierarchy. While much progress was made, racial discrimination continued, and Black people remained burdened by a destructive presumption of guilt and dangerousness. A new era of mass incarceration emerged. More prisons, more police, and more punishment shaped the end of the 20th century. Today, the United States has the highest rate of incarceration in the world. Racial bias is pervasive in the criminal legal system, and the government has projected that 1 in 3 Black male babies born is expected to spend time in jail or prison. Long-standing barriers to economic progress, healthcare, and stable housing have been exacerbated by an epidemic of police violence against unarmed Black people whose quality of life is measurably disadvantaged and distinct from other Americans. The legacy of slavery and racial injustice still creates barriers to just treatment for some, fosters inequality, and fuels racial animus and bigotry. EJI believes a new era of truth and justice is required that compels our nation to reckon with our history. We believe that truth can set us free and lead to healing, redemption, recovery, and repair. The Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice are dedicated to these goals. These institutions have a purpose. Our hope, our vision, is that the children of our children will live in a nation unburdened by the legacy of slavery, free from racial bigotry and injustice. We hope you'll visit us and join the effort to promote truth and justice in America.
And now, David Jameson, a history professor at Edward Waters University, will recite a poem called Eyewitness, a Prayer for Modern Times.
Thank you, Asia. This piece was composed in the wake of the George Floyd murder, and with the realization that without the technology to capture it, it would have been maybe just another in a slew of instances of racial injustice in which the victim was unknown, or that the incident didn't happen. So for many years, the Black community has dealt with instances in which our claims were not believed. So that inspired this piece, Eyewitness, a prayer for modern times. Thank God for the cell phone. Thank God for its world-wandering, all-rovering eye. Thank God for this public panopticon, this electronic data collector. It has proven, finally proven, that we really haven't been making all this stuff up. It's really not a matter of us being overdramatic or whiny or emotional, or the fact that we're just not grateful for all our blessings. It's really just not a matter of us overblowing stories to play the sympathy card about all we could have done had it not been for slavery. Thank God for this newfangled piece of technology that, first in the guise of TV cameras, captured Bull Connor's a senseless overreaction to children crusading by sicking attack dogs on them, and shell-shocked white Americans who had been telling themselves that police brutality in the South couldn't have been as bad as all that. That next, in the guise of a video camcorder, captured the Rodney King abomination and convinced white Americans that there was a problem and something should be done. But King really probably shouldn't have been out at night doing what he was doing. That next, in the guise of voice recording technology, captured George what's-his-name, assassinating Trayvon Martin, and turned white Americans against this sort of vigilantism. That captured Eric, that captured Philando, that captured Ahmaud, that captured George, that captured on and on and on and on. Now you believe us. Now you're like putting your lives on the line alongside us, which is all we've ever wanted. God bless the cell phone. God bless its faceless, judgment-free, all-seeing eye. I bet the predominance of camera technology in modern society will end up being the single greatest weapon against racial justice in American history. I'm not joking. More than the pulpit, more than the pedestal, more than the ballot box, far more than guns or knives, it is our single greatest weapon. It is our nuclear bomb. It is the apocalyptic, all-seeing eye of truth. You simply can't escape it. I bet some cops back in the bad old days are wondering what the big deal is. I bet some of them, the bad ones, are thinking, what? You didn't know we were doing this all along? Isn't this what you wanted us to do? Aren't your daughters and sons drowned in so much white skin that they couldn't possibly have fixed their eye on anything else? That's because we police the bounds of propriety. We're doing it. We're doing what you want us to do. But now we all see. Now we all know. God bless you, cell phone. God bless your ever-loving, ever-watchful eye. You are a savior because you are the eye of God. God bless you and keep you ever watchful. Thank you.
Thank you for such a moving poem. Next, we will hear from Sion Blackwell, a program manager with our partners at EJI. We welcome her to share about the Equal Justice Initiative.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction and that powerful poem. My name is Sion Blackwell, and I'm a Justice Fellow at the Equal Justice Initiative that's located here in Montgomery, Alabama. And I work with our Community Remembrance Project team. And I recently joined the small team that works with the coalition in Duval County, Florida. And I'm so happy to join you all today as you memorialize the life of a man whose name remains unknown, but whose story has truly impacted us all. And so I'll just share a little bit about EJI. You saw some in the video, but I'll give you a little more insight into why a legal office took on this project of memorializing the lives of people who were lynched during this era of racial terror violence. So in 1989, EJI was founded by our executive director, Brian Stevenson, as a legal nonprofit dedicated to representing our clients who have been sentenced to death and condemned to die in prison. But we also were challenging the inhumane conditions of confinement and working to expose the racial bias that exists in our criminal justice system. And through this work, it provided a firsthand view of the many ways that our nation's current era of mass incarceration is deeply rooted in our history of racial injustice. And it inspired us to raise a project called our Race and Poverty Initiative that documents and memorializes the eras of enslavement, racial terror lynching, segregation, and this current era of mass incarceration, forming this legacy of racial injustice. Now, this project has yielded research and public education materials, including our reports, our brochures, and videos, as the one you all saw here today, on the history of slavery, racial terror, lynching, and segregation. And in 2018, we opened our sites in Montgomery, Alabama, and that includes the Legacy Museum from Enslavement to Mass Incarceration and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. The Legacy Museum actually moved to a new location, which is about 4 times bigger than our previous site, and includes content about the transatlantic slave trade. And we opened this newer museum in October of 2021. And we opened these sites because we realized that our country did not have a space for truth-telling and reflection about racial terror in America and its legacy. We have memorials throughout our country that reckon with history of war memorials or tragic events that have happened in our country, but we didn't have anything that really reckoned with the history of what happened and formed a whole eras in our country dealing with the history of racial injustice. And so we developed these memorialization efforts to memorialize the more than 4,400 African-American men, women, and children that we documented who were lynched between 1877 and 1950. And more recently, we documented over 2,000 additional lynchings that occurred during the Reconstruction era right after the Civil War up until 1877. And we know that there are many other unnamed victims of this violence that were never reported. In the case of Jacksonville, we do have an unnamed victim, but his case was reported. But we know we have people who were unnamed and unknown that were reported as well. But to date, we have 6,500 documented racial terror lynchings that occurred between Reconstruction and 1950. And while we have the sites here in Montgomery, we believed it was critical for communities across the country to do this difficult work of unearthing and confronting their own histories. Because while we were forming these sites, which include monuments with the victims' names in each county in America, we realized how localized this history was. There was a monument for Duval County, there was a monument here for Montgomery, there were monuments for Ohio. And we thought about what could local communities do in their own backyards to really reckon with this history, because we know that it's showing itself in contemporary ways. And so as we believe that you need to deal with the past in order to move to a new era of truth and reconciliation, we began to examine how we could help communities reckon with this history. And so we developed our community remembrance projects, which allowed us to collaborate and work directly with these communities to reckon with this history on a local level. And we are honored to support the community memorialization work through the Community Remembrance Project here in Duval County. And so for me, our community soil collection projects that you all will be participating in today are always so powerful because they provide tangible opportunities for communities to engage and reckon with the legacy of racial terror lynching. It allows communities to gather and memorialize, even in this virtual space, the African-American victims whose lives were lost and acknowledge how their communities were impacted by this violence. Today, this soil allows us to remember a man who was never named or identified. However, I'm sure his absence was felt by his family, his friends, and his community, and I'm sure it's still felt today. We may not know his name, his life, or his story, but we know that his life and thousands of other Black men, women, and children's lives were stolen by racial terror violence. We didn't have the cell phone back then, as was mentioned in the poem, but we did have these newspaper headlines. And in some cases, you had postcards that were sent around the country about lynchings, and you had these newspapers that celebrated that there was a lynching that occurred. So it seems throughout these eras, we've had this documentation of Black people's hands, of lives being taken by the hands of people perpetuating this racial terror violence. And as the poet eloquently mentioned, now we have the cell phone, but then it was through the newspapers. And so we know about this victim through the National Urban League and the newspapers, and them getting the word out about what happened to this man after the death of Willie Washington in Duval County. And so I'm glad that you all are able to acknowledge that this did happen in your community, whether this victim is named or not named. And so we know that this violence profoundly impacted race relations in this country and shaped the geographic, the political, the social, and the economic conditions of Black communities that are still evident today. Yet the implications of this violence have never been adequately addressed in our country. So we believe that we must truthfully confront our history of racial injustice before we can repair its painful legacy. So I thank you all today for being here, for being willing to truthfully confront this history, for being willing to honor both the named and the unnamed, and for doing the work. And as you all prepare to collect the soil today, I will leave you with this quote from our Executive Director, Brian Stevenson. "In this soil, there is the sweat of the enslaved. In the soil, there is the blood of victims of racial violence and lynching. There are tears in the soil from all those who labored under the indignation and humiliation of segregation. But in the soil, there's also the opportunity for new life, a chance to grow something hopeful and healing for the future." Thank you.
Thank you, Cyan. Avi Patel is the winner of the EJI Racial Justice Essay Contest and is a student at Stanton College Preparatory High School. The essay competition was offered to 9th through 12th grade students attending Duval County Public High Schools. Students were asked to examine the history of a topic regarding racial injustice and discuss its legacy today. Avi was the winner of a $5,000 scholarship. Please welcome Avi Patel.
Hello, so I'll be reading my essay that I sent to the scholarship contest. So meet African-American pastor Clifford Tyson, an ex-felon who had lost his right to vote after being convicted of armed robbery decades ago. However, his life changed when he finally regained the right to vote for the first time during the 2020 presidential election. "I'm emotional. I'm holding back tears," said Tyson after he cast his ballot. Following numerous court cases and rulings, Tyson and a group of 16 other ex-felons finally regained their voting rights despite Florida's oppressive and restrictive felony disenfranchisement laws. Yet more than 1.6 million other disenfranchised voters throughout Florida have yet to regain their voting rights. Most concerning is that nearly a quarter of this group are African Americans, It was only after decades of constructive legislation and grassroots activism that finally changed the outlook on felony disenfranchisement in Florida quite recently in the passage of Amendment 4 in 2018. Regardless, Florida still has a long ways to go in recompensating the injustices caused by felony disenfranchisement and ensuring that all ex-felons are not deprived of their democratic right once they have served their time for their past misdeeds. Back in antebellum Florida, slave abuse and Black racism were rampant. While slavery ended following the American Civil War, the general state of Black affairs didn't improve much either. Even though most African Americans remained in these southern states like Florida following their liberation, Reconstruction was mainly overseen by white Southerners who aimed to enforce their culture of white supremacy. For example, immediately following the passage of the 15th Amendment, numerous voter suppression tactics were implemented, including grandfather clauses, poll taxes, and literacy tests that prevented African Americans from voting because they were not classified as educationally qualified. During this time, felony disenfranchisement laws were also gaining traction throughout the South to prevent African Americans from holding political office and influencing political outcomes. Florida was no exception, and during the 1868 state constitutional convention, the felony voting section of the Constitution was altered so that no person convicted of a felony be qualified to vote at any election unless restored to full civil rights. This simple change, forbidding the right to vote permanently even after completing one sentence, would forever send ex-felons to the state of civil death, most of which were recently Black freedmen caught on the wrong side amidst the Reconstruction drama. This provision would not be scrutinized again until the mid-1970s, and meaningful change would not be seen until the late 2010s. Enter Desmond Meade, a previously convicted felon who was unable to vote for his wife, Sheena Meade. Subsequently, he organized grassroots movements to help ex-felons to regain their voting rights. Later, as a head of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, FRRC, Meade successfully oversaw the effort to qualify Amendment 4 as a ballot initiative for the 2018 Florida elections. Amendment 4 aimed to permanently restore the voting rights of Floridians with felony convictions after they completed all terms of their sentence. With the support from organizations like the American Civil Liberties Union, the Christian Coalition of America, and Freedom Partners, Amendment 4 forever changed the outlook of ex-felons in Florida after a whopping 64% of Floridians voted in its favor. This, however, was a temporary achievement at best. Although many ex-felons regained their right to vote during this time, many legal conflicts that ensued later would essentially invalidate the decades-long progress made by the FRC, ACLU, and CCA. In June of 2019, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis passed SB 7066, a law requiring convicted felons to pay all fines and fees associated with their sentence before restoring to full civil rights, voting rights. This would be a significant hurdle for many African American families, often making less than 2/3 of their white counterparts. They were one of the most economically poor throughout the country. Funding them to pay the fines would be a huge hurdle, and for many, it was a return to Jim Crow style voter suppression tactics used nearly 100 years ago. Unfortunately, this is the current state of felony disenfranchisement today. Felony disenfranchisement in Florida and beyond is especially concerning because of its demoralizing nature on previously incarcerated citizens. By depriving them the right to vote, they are denied an essential channel to voice their opinions on issues that matter the most, such as the economy, environment, healthcare, and gun policy. More importantly, though, is a feeling of rejection, non-belonging, and hopelessness by the very society that prides itself in its democratic ideals, a pivotal contributor to diminishing citizen morale. The political consequences are even more dire. Felony disenfranchisement has the potential to become a massive game changer in swing states like Florida. Many studies suggest that ex-felons vote increasingly Democratic, having the possibility of changing electoral outcomes. In close margin elections such as those of 2000, 2016, and 2020, Florida's 29 electoral votes can change who the country's next president is. In the Florida gubernatorial elections, the stakes are even higher with smaller margins. Quite recently, American business magnate Michael Bloomberg developed a fund of over $60 million in an effort to re-enfranchise voters who might otherwise not be able to vote in favor of the Democrats during the 2020 election. Initiatives like these not only temporarily solve economic complications of felony disenfranchisement, but in the grand scheme of things, a thorough civic education combined with a closing of the school to prison pipeline can prevent felonies from being committed in the first place, eliminating the need for re-enfranchising felons. With enough political support, Florida can also adopt a permanent prohibition on felony disenfranchisement altogether, creating a system similar to that of Maine and Vermont, where all people can vote regardless of their criminal status. As we move towards a more just society, felony disenfranchisement not only hampers the professional goals of many minority groups like African Americans, but also prevents loyal citizens from partaking in the process that makes the country a true democracy. In Florida, felony disenfranchisement has a long path ahead, but it can be solved only through the electoral process itself, voting for candidates and supporting initiatives that enable felony reenfranchisement instead of disenfranchisement.
Thank you, Avi. Rodney Hurst Sr. is a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, a widower, a cancer survivor, a civil rights activist, a Black historian, an NAACP life member, an author, and a United States Air Force veteran. He is the award-winning author of three books. It Was Never About a Hot Dog and a Coke, a personal account of the 1960s sit-in demonstrations in Jacksonville, Florida, and Axe Handle Saturday, Unless We Tell It, It Never Gets Told, and Never Forget Who You Are, Conversations About Racism and Identity Development, which he co-authored with Dr. Rudy Jameson Jr. Rodney will give a message to the community, followed by a moment of silence as we begin the soil collection portion of the event. The soil collection will begin as you hear the sound of Strange Fruit recorded by Alex Abreu Figueroa. Please welcome Rodney Hurst Sr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer Gilbert, co-directors Melanie Patz and Lynn Sherman, to Hope McMath, Dr. Jameson, to Reverend Gundy. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Motivational and glorious words to some, but pathological hypocrisy to others. Because while Thomas Jefferson was writing those words and putting them in the Declaration of Independence, he owned more slaves than any other person in Albemarle County, Virginia. You know, slaves, those inanimate objects as determined by Christian white America, even though they had warm blood coursing through their bodies, these inanimate objects called Africans. So if you call them property, then you can do any and everything to them as inanimate objects, as a chair, as a table, as a broom in the corner. And that's what this country was founded on. This country was founded on a free labor economy, enslaving persons with a black hue of skin that made this country obscenely wealthy while establishing American capitalism and Wall Street. After 1877, with the compromise that the anti-slave owners decided to the slave owners, we're going to take the troops out of the South in exchange for you supporting our candidate, Rutherford B. Hayes. Then we saw this uptick of violence against Black folk, the Klan, all of these cowardly, racist thugs that started with their violence at night mostly, but still not passive or sensitive enough to not do the violence during the daytime. So what we started in this country, what white Christian folk started in this country, this lynching, is as much a legacy of this country as anything else. Ida B. Wells said that blacks would be lynched for anything: sassing, stealing grain, stealing chickens, accused of stealing grain, accused of stealing chickens. Whatever it was, white folk used that as a way to lynch black folk. In 1900, when James Weldon Johnson wrote "Lift Every Voice and Sing" here in Jacksonville on the campus of Bethel Baptist Institutional Church, 3 to 5 blacks were lynched in this country every week. That was documented. The 4,700 persons documented by EJI and Brian Stevenson is a minimum number based on those persons documented. You know, there were many more blacks lynched in this country than those 4,700. And we're here today to talk about the unknown soldier. This unknown person who was lynched, but who was symbolic of what happened throughout the South. There is not a face on lynching, just like there is not a face on slavery. This country has never apologized for slavery. This country has never passed a lynching law. So we don't have a face to slavery. We don't have a face to lynching. So we'll read somewhere a person was lynched. This person was lynched. This unknown person was lynched. But we don't talk about the conditions under which they were lynched. It was not, oh, we're going to go and lynch you, string you up, and put you on a tree. Those persons were tortured. They were mutilated. Black women who were lynched were raped and mutilated prior to the raping, prior to the lynching. That also included pregnant Black women. That also included children. If I'm going to kill you, then I'm not going to be nice about it. Lynching was as vulgar and pathological as any part in the history of this country. America's original sin is white supremacy. White supremacy birthed slavery. Slavery birthed racism. And we are here today to talk about one of those 4,700 symbols. Symbols in terms of the fact that they're just names, or in this instance, they're just titles, unknown. But not in terms of the fact that these were Black human beings. These were those inanimate objects who had warm blood coursing through their bodies, who this country still considers property. We still don't understand that, because this racist Christian white country still disrespects me because of my Black hue of skin. This is just an instance of remembering. Because if it's left up to racist, incomplete, and dishonest American history, we would know nothing about what happened during that time. And based on what's happening politically, they want us to know less about what was happening during that time. As if this has always been a right, just, and a Christian country, and nothing has been further from the truth. So let's understand what lynchings were. Let's internalize the picture of a Black female lynched and hanging from a bridge. Let's internalize the Black man lynched in front of a tree, on a tree in front of a church in Kentucky. Let's internalize those 4 Blacks lynched in the public square in Greenville, Florida. A picnic occasion. And after they had mutilated their bodies, lynched them, and then burned them, they sold portions of their body as souvenirs. Let's internalize what lynchings were all about. So we remember those who gave their lives for no other reason than the color of their skin, or their advocacy for citizenship, or their advocacy for voting, or their advocacy for who they were and who they are. Because lynchings are still carried out today. Lynchings were designed to send a message to other Black folk. Because when that body hung from a post or from a tree or from a bridge, the only person who was cutting that body down was another Black person who would then tell it by circumstances, like anyone would. So let's not romanticize the period as some tried to do. And I mean the term romanticize as we do American history. Let's not sanitize and homogenize lynchings. Understand, lynchings, like racism, like slavery, came from one of the cornerstones of this country, white supremacy. Let me leave you with this. Don't judge me before you know me. Don't underestimate me before you challenge me. And certainly, don't talk about me until you talk to me.
Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh, then the sudden smell of burning flesh. so strange and bitter.
Thank you. Please join us for the singing of We Shall Overcome by our very own Dr. Jamatoria Burton. Dr. Burton's solo will be followed by closing remarks by Dr. Kimberly Allen, CEO of 90 Forward.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, oh, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. Oh, deep in my heart, oh, I do believe that we'll walk hand in hand someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall live in peace someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome today. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all so much for joining us. In closing, I can't help but think about this book that we just read for church, Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. And one particular passage or chapter comes to mind from that book where she's talking about the people who took pictures with the bodies, the corpses of people who were unjustly and inhumanely murdered at the hands of white people who had been deputized and armed and safe and comfortable to violate Black people. And she talked about now people looking at those photos would say, I would never stand around and watch and pose with the bodies that were hanging from trees or burnt to their core. But I implore you that if you are silent in this moment, if you are not holding hands in solidarity with the people who are saying that enough is enough, that it's no different than taking pictures with those bodies in this time period. And so the time is now. Don't wait. You waited long enough. We've waited long enough. And the time is right now. Call us, email us, figure out how to get on this moving train because it's going. And we are not going to allow our lives to be devalued anymore. And so if you are a part of this, if you're witnessing this, it's not by accident. This is your call to action. This is your opportunity to come with us as we're taking the steps forward to end racism so that we all thrive. I don't take this work lightly, and I hope you don't either. Please spread the word about this because we will continue to do this. We will continue to advocate. We will continue to speak out until we are heard. And so I want to thank you all again for joining us for today's ceremony. I want to thank all of our speakers, our MC, our coordinators, and everybody who helped to plan this. But please know that if you are here in this seat and you ignore this call to action today, it's no different than watching 50, 100 years ago, these bodies being violated and mutilated. Thank you so much. I'll turn it back over to Asia.
Thank you. I would like to thank all the presenters, performers, and planners who made today possible. And thank you all again for joining us today to acknowledge and commemorate an event that we hope will continue to progress toward reconciliation and healing. This concludes the ceremony portion of our event. However, we hope that you would join us for our virtual Caring Circles discussion that will begin immediately following this program. A link should be available in the chat. Again, during the Caring Circles, you will have the opportunity to participate in an open discussion with other audience members about today's experience. Thank you again for joining us and have a good day.